honestly, I look around and what a blessed whānau we have, right? We are so blessed to be in good company. But this morning, actually, no. Yesterday, we had such a hilarious weekend, a start to our weekend. We had a photo shoot. Yes, I know, a photo shoot with 3 boys. A 5-year-old, about to turn 6, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And it was hilarious. Luckily, the professional that was taking our photos, she was so professional. She was able to maintain the attention span of these little ones, and honestly just made the whole process easier. But honestly, the final photo was so hilarious. She was adamant that she was going to get Hosea to smile. If anyone knows Hosea, man, honestly, it's a bit of a mish. But she was real adamant, and honestly, I just got to give it up to her for the skill that she was able to use, and that skill was bribery. We all need bribery here and there, and chocolate ice cream is always the winner. Amen? Amen. Well, this morning we continue our journey observing the fruit of the Spirit. Just to quickly recap, so far we've looked at the fruit of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and goodness. But today we arrive at the notion of faithfulness. Everybody say faithfulness. It's a big one, eh? Faithfulness. Put simply, the English definition of faithfulness is a lasting loyalty and trustworthiness. Did you get that? It is the quality of being true to your word, as to what one has pledged to do or profess to believe. To go a step further, the Bible defines faithfulness as an attribute of God. One who is reliable, who is consistent, who is steadfast, and someone who is unwavering. Amen? And with that said, there's no better way to look at faithfulness than to look at God Himself. Which brings us to our first point of focus. Faithfulness begins with God. Oh, come on, am I speaking to someone this morning? Faithfulness begins with God. You know, unlike us, God is always faithful. Why? Because faithfulness is God's unchanging nature. He is true to His word. He is true to what He says. And God always keeps His promises now and forever. But in contrast, when I think of my mere efforts of being faithful over the years, I'd probably say that on average, I've done an okay job. But by no means have I been consistent. Oh, can anyone relate? In fact, I don't think there's a human being alive that has managed to be consistent in their faithfulness all day, every day, 365 days a year. Am I right? I mean, let's take a little audit this morning, shall we? Let's take exercise, for example. Yes, I said it. Exercise. I love to maintain a consistent rhythm of keeping fit. But I'll tell you what, I'm not always consistent. You know, funny thing is, like just recently, about 3 weeks ago, I started a new workout plan with my brother-in-law. And I remember the first couple of sessions, we were like so excited. You know, we did this thing called a HIIT workout. So we went and did various movements and various exercises. And by the end, we were sweating, we were on the ground, absolutely wasted, absolutely shattered, but I felt massive. We felt real buff. Felt real good. I was like, man, Sarah's going to be so impressed when I get home and check on a tight top. We're so enthusiastic, right? But 3 weeks on, that was the only session we did. I remember seeing him at a rugby game last week, and I was like, bro, we've got to get back into our rhythm that we started. Remember? We started so strong, and I feel like we're fading. I know, wrong brother-in-law. I should be training with Matt. But keeping consistent when it comes to exercise is a hard thing. I usually train in the evening. After I put my kids to bed, I always ask Sarah, hey, it's okay. Is it okay if I head down to the gym? And she's always like, yes. Yes, big man, yes, go. But there's occasions where after putting the kids to bed, I look outside and I'm like, man, it's cold. It's so cold. And then to add to this, Sarah pulls out a warm apple pie from the oven. And I'm left with a dilemma. Do I go to the gym or do I indulge in the pie? Guess what I did? I indulged in the pie. You see, that's the thing. You're laughing at me. How are you going with your exercise at the moment? Right? How many have stayed consistent with their eating plans and their diets? Their attempts to get healthier? What about your goals, your yearly resolutions? How are they tracking? You're giving me that funny look now. Here's a good one. How consistent have you been spending quality time with God? Every day. That's my point. Being faithful doesn't come naturally to anyone. And for this very reason, faithfulness as a fruit of the Spirit can be a very challenging characteristic to uphold. But if we want to exercise the fruit of faithfulness, come on. We need to focus our efforts, first of all, on our faithfulness to God. I love it. Every morning I follow the same routine. Wake up at about 5:30, slowly wake up and I head downstairs and I have to spend time with God. And I'm not saying this to try and convict you or boast. But I'll tell you what, if I don't make time for God in the morning, then God begins to fade in my day. And I know God is all around. God is omnipresent. We all know this. We've heard this so many times. But intentional time with God, it requires a sacrifice. And so I know those mornings are important. To be in connection with the Spirit. But it takes everything inside of me to be faithful to that rhythm. You know, in the Bible, there's a story of Abraham, and it demonstrates the importance of faithfulness. Abraham and his wife Sarah struggled to trust in God, especially as they waited many years for God to fulfill a promise of giving them a son. And consequently, because of her lack of faith, Sarah eagerly insisted that Hagar, her maid, give birth to her son. So customary to the day, Sarah gave her servant Hagar to Abraham. Imagine trying to do that these days. Be a lot of men in trouble. But when Hagar conceived her child, Sarah despised her instead. And to add to this, Sarah began to deal harshly with her, which inevitably caused Hagar to flee from the resentment and the conflict. In the end, when Abraham and Sarah had exhausted all their options, trying to do things according to their own way and desires, they finally gave up and decided to submit themselves in faith to God. And this led to a blessing. And Sarah was able to give birth to a son, despite her childbearing age. Friends, the story of Abraham shows us how God blesses those who are faithful and trust in His plans. You know, as Christians, we are called to be faithful to God. But it's one thing to believe in Him and another to be faithful to Him. Faithfulness requires us to let go of something we may hold close. It requires us to relinquish our own wants and our own desires, just like Abraham and Sarah. It requires us to sacrifice some of the natural comforts, like a sleep-in for me. But of course, like any important relationship, it calls for compromise. In which case, us submitting our way to God and allowing Him to lead and guide us through all life decisions. Proverbs 19 verse 21 says, many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Friends, when we are faithful to God, it shapes and births within us a deep trust. Faithfulness develops our faith in the reality of God, not just an idea of Him. And perhaps most importantly, it produces in us good fruit. Because faithfulness begins with God. You know, like many of you, I've had struggles of my own in the past. Many years ago, I struggled with this thing called keeping my word. And you know, I'm Samoan by nature, and the thing about Samoan culture is that we never want to let people down, and so we say yes to everything. Hey, Seal, can you help us, move? Yeah, sure. Seal, can you help look after our kids? Yeah, sure. Yes, 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 yes. Yes, yes, yes. I was the yes man. But I'll tell you what, I was caught in this trap. Where in my mind I was thinking, yeah, I'm always there for people. And yet little did I realize that I was letting many people down. It took a brave friend to come and confront me and tell me that I had an issue. Many broken promises that I had made to him that I never delivered. And so over the years, I resolved in myself that I would not be that kind of man. Because how can I be trustworthy? How can anyone believe what I say if I can't even keep my promises? And trustworthiness has to be earned. And so I went on this journey, this incredible journey of God refining me, convicting me, reminding me every time I made a promise, Seal, you have to deliver. Not for your sake, but for my sake. If you're meant to bear my image, then how are people seeing you in this world? And what a journey, an incredible journey it has been. Friends, every day We must choose to be intentional with the way that we live our lives. And I'll tell you what, faithfulness requires intentionality, because it doesn't just happen. Oh, come on, am I speaking to someone this morning? Every day I must choose to be intentional with the way that I live. But living with intention means purposefully pursuing the life that God has called me to. But sometimes it requires us to do what doesn't always come naturally, which is to do what pleases God each time, every time. So friends, every day, I got to choose to be a man of my word. This means I got to be purposeful in my promises. If I say that I'll be there for someone, I need to be integrous with that promise. Whether it's big or small, I need to be faithful and I need to deliver on it. What do you need to be faithful to? Every day I've got to choose to walk by the Spirit and not by the flesh. This means no matter how I'm feeling or no matter what valley I'm going through, I must be resolved and faithful to the fact that God is still good. And He sees the bigger picture to my struggle and to my pain. Friends, being intentional is remaining in God's company no matter what. Every day I've got to choose to be faithful in my marriage. Come on. Am I speaking to the husbands, the wives? This means being intentional with what I allow my eyes to see. Being wise with the company that I keep, especially the opposite sex. I'm just being real. Being intentional in my communication with my wife when it comes to intimacy and connection. So my ego doesn't look elsewhere for that connection when she's not paying me attention. Friends, faithfulness requires intentionality every single day because it doesn't just happen. And the Bible reminds us of this notion in Psalm 1. Blessed is the one that does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers, but his delight is on the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, whose leaves do not wither, who bears fruit in season, and everything that he does prospers. But not so the wicked, they are like chaff that the wind blows away. Oh, come on. Don't be unintentional with your day. Don't be like chaff that the wind blows from here to there. Faithfulness requires foresight. Faithfulness requires intentionality. Faithfulness requires planning. Oh, come on, because it doesn't just happen. Faithfulness doesn't mean that we've got to be perfect. It doesn't mean that we won't ever struggle with sin, or that we won't make poor decisions ever again. But being faithful doesn't just happen by default. It happens when we choose to live each day with intentionality. Oh, come on. How are you planning to be faithful? Don't be like chaff that is blown away. Faithfulness is consistency over a long period of time. Oh, come on. Faithfulness is consistency over a long period of time. I'm in my late 30s now. I'm getting right up there. But I just counted, I've been dancing for 27 years. 27 years. I've been a dancer. There's a lot of people that actually don't know that I still dance. It's funny, I bumped into a teacher that I knew from many, many years ago, and I just happened to mention that I was part of choreographing a production last year. She looked at me and she was like, "You're still dancing?" I'm like, "Yep, this old fella's still dancing." But I'll tell you what, dancing for me doesn't just happen. It's consistency and practice over a long period of time. Man, of course I know that I'm not as limber as I used to be. Probably not as fast as I used to be. Probably not as flexible as I used to be. But I can still dance. And so every day I make room for that. I make margin for dancing, stretching, exercising. Because I know that it's still part of my ministry when I go to schools. But it takes time. It takes consistency over a long period of time. Friends, faithfulness and consistency is not just doing something right once, but doing it over and over and over. Come on. It's not just doing something right once. It's doing it over and over again. Just like my attempts to be consistent with dance, so that I can break the world record of being the oldest hip-hop dancer in history. And making it a consistent habit every day to cultivate a life of faithfulness for the long haul. You know, we live in a world where everything is instant, where everything is for short-term gratification. Yet the concerning thing about this culture is that it can influence our faithfulness to be short as well. However, our call as believers, as followers of Jesus, as apprentices, is to be faithful followers for a long period of time and enduring faith. 1 Corinthians 4 verse 1 to 2 says, "This is how one should regard us as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found," come on, found faithful. As cliche as this may sound, faithfulness is truly a long distance race. So it's not a sprint. And if we can but hold firm to faithfulness, there will be the greatest eternal reward that awaits us. But perhaps more importantly, may our great longing be to reach the end of this earthly life and hear these words from the Almighty One Himself. "Well done, good and faithful servant." Why don't you stand to your feet? In summary, let me remind you that faithfulness begins with God. It begins with us relinquishing our need to be in control and allowing God's Spirit to lead us. Remember that God is the one that is trustworthy. And He always is faithful, even when we are not. That's the nature of God.